Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being followed in the current edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined this week by Thad Greenson, news editor, and Jennifer Fumiko Cahill, arts and features editor at the North Coast Journal. Hey, welcome, guys.
How you doing?
Hey, Dave, how you doing?
Pretty good. We got a little rain, just a little teaser this week, and we got a little frost, a little teaser this week, so it's definitely autumn. And
it's upon us, for sure.
It's upon us, yeah, like time flies when you're having fun. So speaking of having fun, Thad, why don't you, we'll go start with you and you tell us a little bit about what you're covering this week.
Yeah, so this week had a couple pieces in the paper. One was on the Board of Supervisors vote yesterday to move forward with a kind of mandatory testing program for non-vaccinated county employees. The staff had come to the supervisors with a kind of an array of options about the central question whether to impose some type of testing program or vaccine mandate on county employees, all, I think, 2,500 of them. So it's a pretty significant chunk of the local population. And after just kind of a marathon discussion and lots of public input, most of which I have to say was decidedly against a vaccine mandate for public employees and on very flimsy ground, scientifically and legally. There's just like all kinds of wild claims being made that just really aren't supported by either what scientific data tells us about the vaccines or what the law tells us about what public agencies can do as far as mandating these things. But ultimately, the board was kind of, was apparently split. It seemed like 5th District Supervisor Steve Madrone and 3rd District Supervisor Mike Wilson were supportive of a vaccine mandate for employees, but it became pretty clear that the balance of the board was not. And so ultimately they decided to ask staff to bring back kind of the framework of a testing program in which all county employees would be tested weekly unless they can show proof of vaccination. So the idea being that all non-vaccinated employees would be tested regularly as kind of a surveillance method.
So there was a whole bunch of, back and forth on details about their range of options. And I'm sure we're not going to, people can check out the story or check out the meeting itself for that. But when it came to the testing, what was some of the reservations about how, it's going to be decided by the staff, but what was the dialogue about who to test and why?
Yeah, primarily, 2nd District Supervisor Michelle Bushnell seemed to have major reservations about only mandating that unvaccinated staffers be tested, and kind of pointing out that that there are breakthrough cases and fully vaccinated individuals have been known to catch COVID, and what's to prevent one of them from catching COVID and bring it into the workplace. And so, I think partly kind of casting it as an equity measure that if we're going to do it for some county employees, we should do it for all. But then also as a workplace safety measure, saying that kind of just requiring it of unvaccinated folks wasn't quite sufficient. Now, Public Health Officer Ian Hoffman kind of countered that the CDC and California Department of Public Health don't recommend surveillance testing of vaccinated individuals, basically saying that testing supplies are still spread pretty thin. There's still supply chain issues there. And while it's true that breakthrough cases do occur and fully vaccinated individual can catch COVID and pass it on to somebody else, emerging data is really showing that they're far less contagious if they do catch COVID, and that their period of having transmissible viral load in their body is much shorter than for unvaccinated people. So while that risk is there for vaccinated individuals coming into the workplace, it's much less so than for unvaccinated individuals. And that's ultimately where the board landed. And Bushnell ultimately supported the proposal to kind of limit testing just to the unvaccinated folks.
So strained consensus. Can you share us briefly with us briefly?
Isn't that just kind of like the theme of the board though these days? Strange consensus.
Exactly right. But so in the article you referenced that the city of Eureka had a different conclusion or a different process that they chose. Can you tell us briefly about that before we wrap up?
Yeah, exactly a week earlier, the same basically the same agenda item came before the Eureka City Council, and the council voted unanimously to impose a vaccine mandate, and a pretty strict one for city employees. That they have a very narrow area to get a vetted religious or medical exemption that would be approved by city staff, and absent that, they all need to be fully vaccinated by November 23rd or lose their positions. And I think it's important to note that stance or that proposal was backed by both of the major employee unions in the city of Eureka, so the Municipal Employee Union and the Police Officers Association.
Great. Well, thank you for covering this public discourse. I know it's really nuanced and controversial, so hang in there, and we look forward to hearing an update, future updates about what the board decides, Board of Supervisors.
There's a lot there. We'll be writing about it for a while.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's also see what else you're covering. You got a second thing in the pipeline today we could talk about.
Yeah, we have another story in the paper this week that is looking at a critical incident video that the Arcata Police Department released that captures footage of the police shooting of Charles David Chevrel last month on Mad River Road in Arcata.
Tell us a little bit about what you're able to discern from the video, and a little backstory of kind of what people are looking at if they go online to check it out.
Yeah, so we, as we've discussed before, kind of a relatively new state law mandates that agencies disclose critical incident videos or videos of, extreme uses of force causing great bodily injury or police shootings. At the very latest, kind of within 45 days of the incident. And so the Journal had submitted Public Records Act requests to both the Arcata Police Department and the California Highway Patrol, which are the two agencies that caught footage of this incident. And what was released was by the Arcata Police Department, and it's a edited, curated kind of video that's called a critical incident video, and I think it's about 9 minutes long, and it's basically the police agency walking the public through what happened from its point of view. So everything from when the call for service came in to when shots were ultimately fired, and kind of edited within that are clips from body-worn cameras and patrol vehicle mounted cameras at the scene. So you can kind of see clips of the scene as it unfolds. I'll add real quick that what the Journal has requested from both these agencies is the full unedited videos. So kind of all footage and all audio recordings of the incident, because, narratives can be shaped by the way videos edited and released and stuff. But what we've seen from the incident via this Arcata video is, shows the officers were called to the scene of a man walking in the street with a gun. And it shows kind of over the course of about 15 minutes, officers trying various methods to kind of try to de-escalate the situation when Chevrel was really being non-compliant, rather caustic. He didn't, up until the very end, he didn't, threaten officers or draw his gun, but he kind of from the moment they arrived on scene, he was, urging them to just shoot him and saying some pretty volatile things. And what because we're limited on time here, I think what we really zoomed in on, or what I thought was kind of the most interesting element of the video is, police had said, I think at the time of the incident, that he had brandished a weapon at officers, which was what prompted one of the officers there to open fire on him, killing him. They hadn't really released more than that, and the video shows him actually draw his pistol and fire upon the officers. But what I thought was most interesting is kind of what led to that moment. And again, it's kind of a very tense scene where numerous officers and patrol vehicles are kind of following this guy on foot who is talking to them intermittently. He has a pistol on his hip, but is not kind of listening, is not wanting to dialogue with them. And he's walking down Mad River Road as it kind of makes a big bend toward the beach. And it's a stretch where it goes from being very rural and a lot of farmland to a cluster of farmhouses. And so you can kind of hear the officers talking about how that changes the dynamic of the situation. And they're not just worrying about their safety, they have to start worrying about, other members of the public safety. And so at some point in this dialogue, they kind of formulate a plan that they are going to, an Arcata police officer there has a pepper ball gun, which is a gun that fires rubber rounds that are filled with OC spray or pepper spray. And it's kind of a chemical irritant. And they're often used for kind of crowd control situations. But they develop this plan that they're going to roll up, that patrol car is going to roll up and the officer is going to jump out and basically open fire on Mr. Chevelle with these pepper balls. And what you see is the officer gets out and he opens fire and kind of the shooting, he doesn't give a verbal warning, which is not hard, fast required by Arcata Police Department policy, but kind of, I think there's a clause like when feasible or when reasonable, officers are supposed to warn somebody that they're going to use a less than lethal means of force on them. And so the officer doesn't do that. The pepper balls clearly take Mr. Chevelle by surprise. He, in the story, kind of liken it to him seeming like he thinks he got stung by a bee or something. He just kind of has that classic reaction looking down. I think the first one hits him in his leg. And then he immediately draws his pistol and starts to run away. And as he gets a few strides kind of across the street, he turns back over his shoulder and points the gun at officers and lets off a round, at which point a highway patrol officer who has his rifle trained on Mr. Chevelle fires once and kills him. And I think it raises some really kind of interesting questions about both less than lethal force and kind of its application, but then also, de-escalation tactics. And I think a lot of times less than lethal options are kind of inherently considered by the public to be de-escalation. And this is a situation where, understanding officers had a lot of, complicated variables to take into account of how to diffuse the situation or end the situation. It's also very clear that the use of this non-lethal weapon absolutely escalated the situation. And he went from just kind of walking away from officers to pulling a gun and opening fire on them.
Yeah, you brought up a ton of interesting points here, worth exploration. A couple follow-up questions, briefly, of course. So one is the edited version of the video was released, but the Journal has requested the full video, and this is from one of the two police agencies involved. Can you just tell us a little bit about what's required of them? Is an edited video, is that sufficient? And then also, what about the expectation from getting a second set of evidence from the other agency?
Yeah, so the new law that went into effect in, I think, 2019 requires that agencies basically release all video and audio recordings from a critical incident as soon as it will no longer jeopardize the investigation. And basically, if they want to extend that beyond 45 days, there's a bunch of steps they need to take. But if at any point after a critical incident, they're going to decline to release the footage, they need to kind of specify why it would hamper the investigation. And so, for instance, we asked this for this footage from Arcata Police Department, and their initial response was, no, we have up to 45 days. It'll hamper the investigation. And we're kind of like, well, you don't really have up to 45 days at this point. You have until it won't hamper the investigation. If you're going to say it's going to hamper the investigation, that's understandable, but you need to give us a really specific reason as to how it will hamper the investigation. And then pretty quickly they're like, well, actually, we're going to release this critical incident video and we'll get you the full video footage this week. So we're expecting that kind of any time now from Arcata. The California Highway Patrol has similarly just declined, said it will hamper the investigation. We're not going to release it. I think they said until November, which just kind of isn't a sufficient response under the law. And so we're going to challenge that, especially in light of the fact that Arcata has now released this footage that, if anything was going to hamper the investigation, you would think that this footage that Arcata just released would do that also. So kind of mooting CHP's argument.
Well, thank you very much for your diligence and for, kind of explaining a little bit about the backstory of how this is unfolding. I know we'll hopefully pick up later conversations once we have more evidence or about, now that this is in the community domain, how does the community exercise oversight, maybe impact future behaviors? So thank you. I feel like this is that solutions journalism thing that we talk about, where you point at something that's happening in the community and you kind of walk through the process together, the Journal and your viewers and readers. So thank you for your efforts, and we'll look forward to talking to you more about it.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. The one thing I'd add is I think that the release of these videos, while the video, what the videos depict is tragic, the release of them is exciting because it finally gives the community kind of the chance to have an informed discussion about these incidents and how to prevent them in the future.
Right on. Thank you very much. Let's pivot to you, Jennifer. What are you following on the arts and features beat this week?
Well, we have sort of an arts and features cover this week. Gabrielle Gopinath, who writes our Art Beat column most recently, she's covered a lot more when we had Arts Alive and things like that. But she has, covered occasionally some architectural stories. And this week is a chance for her to spread her architectural wings because she's looking at the Eureka Theater, which is a grand old movie palace. It opened in 1939. And right now there's a lot, right now, but for many years, there's been a lot of effort to try and bring it back to its former glory. I learned a lot about Streamline Modern, right? This is America. We say Streamline Modern. Yeah. So previously, I think I've mistakenly called this theater Art Deco. In fact, it is not. The difference between Art Deco and Streamline Modern is the sort of emphasis on motion, on what she refers to as raking lines. Think about an old, speeding train, right? That those lines in those old travel posters where the front is so sort of smooth and streamlined. There are a lot of streamlined modern elements in places that have to do with transportation, like airports and train stations and things like that. And our theater has the same vibe. When you walk in and it's got those curved elements on the ceiling and it's got these lines kind of pulling you forward and these curved lights that flank the entrance to the theater, the actual doors to the theater where you sit. The whole lobby, with the way that the staircases curve upward with these big, beautiful silver handrails and, the way the mezzanine looks and all the silver leafing on the ceiling, you really do get this sense of like motion. And for us, we look at that and we're like, wow, this feels so vintage. This feels like a long ago classic era, right? But at the time, it was really like, this is high tech. This is state of the art. This is, forward motion, speed, and technology. And that made a certain amount of sense given that, this was the movies, which had only recently become talkies and even more recently become color movies. There were still plenty of black and white movies being released when this movie theater opened, but there was also The Wizard of Oz, right? And the speed at which films moved, right, the number of frames per second had also increased and made movies more realistic, more smooth. And I imagine that moviegoers at that time went to the theater and were amazed in the same way that my new TV freaked me out a couple of years ago. Like, is everyone in the room with me? I can see everyone's pores. It's kind of terrible. But she talks about the architecture, and we have some great photos, some that were taken by Ryan Filgus a few years ago, of what the theater looks like now during the renovation. And some that were taken, who knows who took them, but they were in the custody of the folks renovating the theater, one of them being Chuck Petty, who shared them with us. And they are somewhere between 1939 and 1949. And we get to see what the theater looked like, basically when it opened. And so we have some great side-by-side shots. One of the cool things that Gabrielle is covering in here is also the apartment, the secret apartment. If you've ever been up to the mezzanine, there's like a couple doors off to the sides and, storage rooms, whatnot. But then there's also an apartment. George M. Mann, apparently traveling around, covering his theater empire. He built a bunch of theaters along the North Coast. When he was traveling, he often stayed in Eureka, and he stayed in this little secret apartment. You can see from, when you're walking in front of the Morris Grays in the theater, you can see like a little terrace up on the second floor. And that's the terrace looking out from this apartment, which is wicked cool. It's in the same style as the theater in that it's got all these curved walls, all of these arches and like, furniture that's built in, like shelving that's built in is also curved to have that same streamlined modern feeling. And the plan is once it is redone in the style in which it was originally intended with the colors and everything and with vintage furniture and all that stuff, once it's back in its original shape or as close to its original shape as you can get and still have, a microwave, it's going to be a short-term rental. And despite my hope to move the journal offices into that space, apparently it's too small. The clawfoot tub is not enough of a drive for everyone. But it's going to be a short-term rental, and you'll be able to stay in this, streamlined, modern, old school apartment that's secretly above the theater. And as Gabrielle points out, what theater nerd doesn't want to do that?
It's really cool article. The photos are, I think the before after are definitely worth checking out. Just to know that we have such a really neat historic place here that will at some point be more accessible publicly. I think Gabrielle's article, it's almost a romantic tribute to the legacy, the history, but also to the fact that people took the time and the care to update it. I know we have another thing we're going to talk about today, but can you tell us a little bit about how it got renovated or who did it?
Yeah, the folks who came in, and pitched in, they've done a ton of fundraisers and things and put in so much thankless work. Including some local artists like Peter Santino did a lot of work. Dale McCauley is doing a lot of the renovation of the big sign outside. I recall when Peter Santino was like silver leafing the ceiling upstairs. It's painstaking work that has to be done, by hand, by artisans. And it's taken a long time, but honestly, when you look at the results, it's pretty worth it. And as Gabrielle points out, right now, I could be watching a movie while I'm talking to you on my phone, right? I could be like split screening us right now. You can kind of watch movies anywhere. And the pandemic has made that even more of a thing for people. Once we are able to comfortably sit in movie theaters, which, a planned event for this month at the Eureka Theater was canceled because of COVID and the Delta variant moving through the community. But once we're able to get back into theaters comfortably, it's got to be more of an experience to really draw a crowd and get people to come out and make a night of going to the movies. And so hopefully this experience, this ambiance, and this throwback vibe will be something that will draw people to the movies.
Fantastic. I think it will. I think once people see it, they'll be like, I got to experience this. It's really neat. Well, thank you very much. In our closing minutes, do you want to tell us a little bit about another story that you're following this week?
Yeah, I got the chance to finally do something I've been dying to do, which is to attend one of these Portuguese feasts in Ferndale. They have them in Arcata too now and then. But for the last 2 years, obviously, COVID, shut down, not so much with the gathering. This past weekend, the Portuguese Hall Association of the Eel River Valley. They had their Feast of Our Lady of Fatima, and that is an annual Catholic celebration about the appearance of the Virgin Mary in Portugal. And they have a big feast, and they make a special soup that is from the Azores, and it is a bunch of bones and everything boiled into a broth served with cooked cabbage and staled bread that the soup gets poured over. And it's a big elaborate thing to make, and also this long stewed kind of pot roast. And they gathered with a vaccinated kitchen staff and a big hall with hopefully more circulation than your average restaurant, and served like 95 people. And I was there, and it was really something to learn about all the people who were doing the cooking, which is most of what the story in the paper is about. It was, I have to admit, really strange. And in some ways not totally comfortable to be at a large gathering of mixed households. And, I felt comfortable keeping my mask on the whole time. It was strange, and it was a strange way to mark, where we are in the pandemic, where There's nothing saying that you can't gather in terms of, the law. There's not that much difference between this gathering and restaurants that are open every day, day in, day out, with, dining in and whatnot. But it feels really strange. And we're not quite back to where, this is a normal thing for us again. But, people are doing, trying to keep their traditions alive at the same time.
Well, thank you so much for giving us the report from the field. There's so much more in your article about the tradition and the folks participating for, into their 70s and attending into their 90s. It's a really great event. So I'm glad you're able to kind of thread the needle on the public health versus the need to kind of engage with the community's traditions. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
That's about going to do it for us this week. So much more in North Coast Journal. Pick one up. They're on newsstands now. Also available online anytime. Till then, everybody, stay informed, stay safe. And both Thad, Jennifer, thank you again, and take care till next week.
Thanks, David.
Have a good one.